Today, I am joined by a very special guest, somebody who has been with me since the start of the whole polyglot movement, language learning movement online. Luca and I made friends really because of a video that he put out on YouTube, and then I put out a video on YouTube inspired by him and his brilliance, and wanted to really get together to meet up, to become friends, and we did just that. And so I've never really looked back from that moment. And every time we meet up, it's like no time has passed. We can hug each other and talk to each other about anything, and it's always such a pleasure. And the Polyglot Conference is something very special with Luca as well, because really it was an idea that we talked about together in Poland. And for both of us, Poznań is a really special place for that reason, because we wanted to have people come together from the online community in person, because that was the little thing that was missing. And since then, we've come back year on year, and Luca has been wonderful in coming and speaking at a number of events, and also at the sister event, the Polyglot Gathering, and traveling around the world, meeting people, going to different things. And he's obviously internet famous now, so I mean, I'm glad that he could be with us. Yeah, he's absolutely wonderful. I can see him pretending that he doesn't know this, but he does. And he offers some really cool advice with language learning. I mean, most of it I completely disagree with, but he's got some good stuff in there as well. No, but in all seriousness, Luca, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for your friendship over all of these years as well.
Thank you, Richard, for the lovely presentation. It's my honor to see you, to talk to you, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you, to see you. And you're right, every time we meet, just hug, and time hasn't passed. It's just amazing, you know. So, and back to you. Everything you said about me, I think about you. So, you know, so it's always amazing to talk to you in real life. Luchino. I love it. Luchino.
Tell me more, Luchino. Tell me more about how good I am.
You know it. You know, I can't flatter anymore. It's already like a balloon. No, I'm kidding. It's not true.
When I wrote to Luchino about all of the sort of the idea of this topic of having a Q&A session, talking about languages, sort of just having an informal chit chat and taking questions from the public as well, he was like, yeah, absolutely. And I said, is there anything you want to talk about? And he said, the Intermediate Plateau. And I was like, okay, let's do it. And I'm interested to know what he's got to say, because I don't think the thing exists. So I'm interested to know what Luchino's got to say about the Intermediate Plateau. Luca, what is the Intermediate Plateau as you define it?
Very interesting. I want to premise this by saying that sometimes Richard and I disagree on some things, which is great. And it's actually the reason why, when, you know, this is a premise, the reason why I believe that when people look for methods, I think they have to look for principles more than methods, because successful language learners learn in very different ways. And still remember, you know, I have this bidirectional translation method, which I use to learn languages as a beginner. And Richard very candidly told me one time, I would never do this, Luchino, you know, just because we're different. And he has his own way of learning. I have my own way of learning. And the most important thing is when you watch Richard's videos, or anybody who's been successful in language learning, just extract the good things and make it yours, and you can find your own way. You can just use these ingredients as a recipe to learn any foreign language. So having said that, with that premise, I would say, what is this Intermediate Plateau thing? Let's say that in general, when it comes to skill acquisition, without delving into these like very complicated terms in linguistics, etc., but in skill development, you have mainly three areas. You have the so-called beginner area. Let's simplify here, because it's a little bit more complicated than that. But for the sake of simplicity, we have the beginner zone, or the beginner phase, or the beginner stage, whatever you want to call it. Then you have the intermediate stage, and then you have the so-called advanced stage. And mind you, this is in literature, so it's been, you know, it's something that has been discussed for decades now. And the intermediate plateau, or in the intermediate phase, is that phase of language learning where you're past the so-called beginner place or beginner phase, where you are just, you know, you don't know anything of the language. You've been learning it for a little bit, maybe for 3 months, and you're still using course books to understand the structure of the language. The intermediate zone, on the other hand, is where you already figured that out. You already know how the structure of the language works. Maybe you finished, for example, a course book like Asimil, or you have followed another program for 3 to 6 months, and you got the foundation down, so to speak. So you understand how the grammar works, how pronunciation works, but you still cannot understand movies, or you cannot understand, for example, it's difficult for you to read a book. I believe that if you've heard of CEFR, or a Common European Framework for Languages, it's a European framework. They classify this zone, so to speak, between, let's say, A2 and B2, where B2 is fluency, meaning that you have a very good command of the language. You're able, for example, to attend university lectures. You're able to read books, and you're able to watch movies and understand at least the gist of it. That's where I would say between A2 and B1, for those who know those labels, that's the intermediate zone. Now, so you know enough that course books become boring, but you don't know enough to enjoy the language at a level where you can just live the language without having to sit down and learn. I don't know if this is, I know that you don't believe in the intermediate zone, Richard, but this is my definition. Everybody's got a different definition. And for me, the fact that I define things this way really helps me in the way I learn. Because if I have 3 main zones or areas, I know exactly what to do in zone 1, get a course book, learning with a bidirectional translation, do it for 45 or 60 minutes a day. That's a how, when, and what. Then in the intermediate stage, I have a series of techniques or strategies that adapt to that kind of skill level. Because you have to remember that you cannot use one single thing or one activity throughout the whole language path, because your skills change. So something that is at the beginning is pretty exciting, I guess, for you as well, Richard. When you get a course book, everything is new. But after 3 months, you look at it and say, "This is boring. I want to move on to other stuff." So you constantly have to change the way you learn, what you're using in order to learn. And the intermediate zone is particularly interesting, because I believe that in the beginner zone and in the intermediate stage, that's where a lot of learners kind of, give up. They raise their hands and they say, "Can't continue anymore because this is too difficult." So that's why I wanted to talk about it in a nutshell.
Okay, I like how you've described it. You set the scene very well, and I think I'm on board with the whole concept of what you described. I think it's a semantics from my point of view, because the idea of a plateau of not moving anywhere is, for me, that's my stumbling block, because I think mentally it gives this imagery of you leveling out in your language learning, and I don't. That's where I disagree with the idea of an intermediate plateau. I suppose I think it's just the gradients are less noticeable, because when you first learn a language, you go up really quite drastically, and then the gradient flattens out a bit. But I don't think it's necessarily a plateau if you're actually continuing to work on it in the same way as we think of a plateau of on top of a mountain that's maybe just completely flat. So I think it's just semantics. But what you described, I'm on board with, Luke. We're in the same boat. We're on the same team. We are united.
Yeah, no, while you were talking, I hope you can see it, because I'm using a DSLR camera and it changes the focus. So I guess I was drawing this. I hope you can see it. I hope so. Let's see if it's possible. So basically what happens is that people tend to expect the language learning, the skill development is linear, while it flattens, and you were describing, because unfortunately, when you get better, then the return of investment gets smaller. This is in terms of vocabulary, in terms of skills. So you say, well, I just got to to B1. So now it's my language learning is gonna skyrocket. It's actually quite the opposite, unless, and here I want to, my terrible drawing. You're right. It's never really flat. There's never one single moment in time where your language skills are frozen, because our brain is plastic. It changes all the time. So if you don't practice, say, a language, and you go to a party, you've been practicing, say, I don't know, Serbian or Danish for 3 months, and people are like, wow, you speak so well. Then you forget about it. You don't learn for 2 months or 3 months, and your skills go down. So it's never really flat. The problem is that if it becomes kind of flat or stalls, but never completely flat. Let's say you're in maintenance mode, so you're not moving towards the next level. When you engage with a language in a way where you just, what I call simple practice instead of purposeful practice or deliberate practice. And what I mean by that, let me give you a very concrete example of what it means. Unfortunately, I believe that the main rule of language learning, very simple. Stephen Krashen is the man in this regard. He explains it everything. I know you talk to him. He explains everything so clearly. It all makes sense because it's as simple as it is true that in order to learn a language, you have to get massive input. If you watch movies, read books, and you do all that stuff, talk to friends, then the language is going to grow in you subconsciously and consciously. There's one thing, though, that I disagree with the whole thing, both with Steve and Stephen Krashen, but also with Steve Kaufman. I love everything they say. Just this thing, in this regard, I'm a little bit different. I add on top of that, which I consider a layer that is absolutely necessary for language growth, I add kind of something that is called deliberate practice, meaning that I do things, especially when I get to the stage where I know that my language skills are going to stall, I use deliberate practice in order to keep improving. You might be wondering, what is deliberate practice? So let's say that simple practice and deliberate practice are two modes of learning modes. And when I came up with this idea, I actually realized that this is something that has been discussed I think it was Berkeley by, I don't remember the name of these two. I think that these two authors, but they created this amazing course on learning how to learn. These are, I think they call it intensive and diffuse mode, but the concept is exactly the same. Simple practice is something that you do, for example, that you would do when you are engaging in some activity in your own native language. Let me give an example. For example, reading. You're just reading a book. That's simple practice or practice. You're just reading. Or you're watching a movie in your native language. Let's talk about your native language first. Or you're chatting with a friend, in a pub. So this is kind of simple practice. Deliberate practice or purposeful practice, they're slightly different, but the concept is the same, is that you do something with the specific aim of improving your language skills. So on the one hand, let's talk about the four main areas of language learning. Reading a book for the sake of reading it, like you're sprawled on the couch, you're relaxing, you're reading The Lord of the Rings. You can do that if you know English well enough so that you can engage in extensive reading. If you can't, and you are in the so-called intermediate zone, then if you're reading a book or an article, it's good practice to take 1 page or 2 pages, this is called intensive reading, and dissect it. There are so many tools in which you can immediately kind of create a translation and you can understand the content. That's intensive and that's deliberate practice. Speaking, you're talking to a friend in a pub, that's speaking, you're using the language. In order to be able to do that, you have to have a certain level. Before you get to the level, you might want to engage in conversations with your tutor on Italki, where the tutor helps you. He's friendly. He knows it's a kind of very conducive, let's say, an environment conducive to learning. You record the conversation, you choose a topic beforehand, you talk about it, you get feedback over your grammar errors, mistakes, and whatnot. Then you re-listen to the conversation and you try to learn upon that. That's deliberate practice. For writing, that's the same thing. One thing is to write a journal in your own native language or in your target language, but you have to get there. You have to be able to have a certain level. And on the other hand, if you have a lower level, you can engage in deliberate writing. You write something, you get feedback, preferably live, and then you improve upon that. So this is across let's say, all areas of language learning, and that's where you have to balance both simple practice and deliberate practice in order to improve. Because if you think about it, if you just engage in deliberate practice, then you get burned out. It's something that becomes a chore. I have to sit down, I have to do. So what I normally do, and what I recommend my students, and we're doing that in this course I created, is that we kind of balance the two things. So you engage in simple practices kind of as a reward, but you also balance it with deliberate practice, so that you keep both running and walking at the same time. I see it like walking and running a hill, just where the first part of the hill until you reach V2 is you have to walk and run at the same time. If you just run, you get burned out. If you just walk, you get there very slowly. That's my theory and also my practice. I've been doing this for years and it works. Well, one last thing I wanted to say, Richard, the reason why a lot of people get, their language learning stalls is because they tend to do simple practice. They watch something, they listen to a podcast, they read something. That's all fine and dandy. But unfortunately, unless you're Richard or another incredible guy who has a different, maybe photographic memory for most of us mortals, reading just or listening to a podcast just once is not enough. You have to find ways to focus better on what you're doing and extract things across, through a step-by-step process. And this is backed up by science, and it works if you're willing to put that in practice.
I think this is the thing, isn't it? It's it doesn't go in by osmosis, is the thing with languages. It's something we do. There is an element of working at it as well. And yes, we can sort of absorb languages. We're in an environment where no one speaks any other language, but our brain still has to be prepped and primed and ready to accept language, right? Because you get people who live in countries all of their lives and can barely get by in day-to-day communications in the language of the country. So even with all of that on your doorstep, doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna learn the language, right?
Absolutely. I think the main problem of this is first that people are not you guys watching this. I'm pretty sure you're the exception that confirms the rule, but a lot of people tend to be lazy when it comes to language learning. They choose the laziest pattern, which is, okay, I'm just listening and just watching videos. I remember there was one guy who sent me a message and said, I've been watching videos in French for 2 years and I still can't speak it, or still don't speak it well, or still have a hard time, understanding here and there, because he was just engaging in simple practice. I think if he had done a little bit more of active thing, that's what I disagree in part with those who say that you just get massive input and then it's all going to happen. Unfortunately, it's not that automatic. It might be the case for languages that are really similar to yours. So say if you're Italian and if you expose yourself to just simple practice for hours and hours in, say, Spanish or even Portuguese, there's a good chance you're going to learn the language by exposure because the language is similar. If you're trying it with Georgian or with Russian or with other languages, it's going to be very difficult, or Arabic for that matter, because the language structure is so different that just reading a text and, even if it has a translation, and it's not that easy to learn. You can, there are ways of learning without any translation, but I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot when we avoid using translation because we think that the so-called grammar translation method is old. It's how you use it that counts. Nowadays, we have amazing tools to speed up the process. It's how you use a tool that counts. You look at the hammer. A hammer can either kill someone or build a house. You can do both things. So the same thing is with the tools that you have. If you use them properly, I think that you can do amazing things. The problem is also, the willingness of doing that long term, because it takes a long time to reach V2. I know I shouldn't say that because it might sound discouraging, but it takes time. It takes months and it takes a couple of years to get a very good level in a language. And if you know that, and the most important thing is to work every day for 30, 45 minutes, better than 30. 60 better than 45, but then you have to find the time and you have to find the will also to engage in both practices. It's not enough just to throw yourself on the bed and watch a YouTube video,
And Luca, you mentioned using tools that are available to us, and there are a number of them that are, some of them very famous. And Tommaso mentioned one in the comments, which I sort of want to pick up on now because I think it's quite a nice thing to do. Duolingo. Is that something that's going to help you in your language learning? Is it something you've used?
So this is a provocative question. Look, he's giggling. So let me say that I'm not saying I'm against apps, but I've never used an app to learn a language. So I'm not saying that all apps are bad or anything. The appalling thing is that so when I talk to a random person, meet someone at the party, oh, I'm learning Spanish with Duolingo. That's what they normally say, especially from the US, but not only, right? So before it was Rosetta Stone, now it's Duolingo, I guess, that, things are the way they are for those who don't know in general about language learning. But I believe that when I'm talking about tools, so before we talk about my tools or the tools I use, let me preface this again by saying that if you want to use apps, be it SRS systems, Anki, Duolingo, Babbel, you're free to do that. If you want to use, I think I heard of Speakly as well, that it's good. You can use them on top of what you normally do. The base of the pyramid, the main idea is for me, and that's a fundamental rule of language learning, both in the beginning and at the intermediate stage, is to get exposure to rich, compelling, interesting content. Rich, compelling, and comprehensible. These are the three main characteristics of content. Stephen Krashen talks about it in a wonderful video that is free to watch. All his stuff is free. I highly recommend you go to his channel and watch this video. I don't remember which one, but if you write these, comprehensible content, you will find it. Like, if you do that, then you can use all the apps you want on top of that. You can do stuff. But if you get exposed to a rich, comprehensible, interesting content, then language learning is going to happen. It's no matter what. Now, what does it mean that something is rich and something is interesting and something is comprehensible? Rich means that it contains stuff that you do not know. If you watch a YouTube video that you understand completely, you're not learning much. We're talking about growing here. We're not talking about maintenance. We're talking about learning more words, learning more expressions. So if the content is rich, then it means that it contains some contents, portions of it that you do not understand. If it's really incomprehensible, meaning that you're listening to a podcast that's way too difficult, you're not going to listen to it. So you have to find the sweet spot, which is called the Goldilocks zone in literature, where something is not too difficult, something is not too easy. So it contains some stuff that you still don't know. That's the first thing, okay? Rich, that's very important. Then you have interesting. We come from years of school where we do stuff that is super boring. Like they gave us these terrible articles to read or the stuff to read. Well, now you have the possibility of doing your own research and find something that is interesting. I was just before this interview, I was watching Astronia, that's in Greek. Super interesting, amazing stuff. I said, oh my gosh, this is on YouTube and I can watch such an amazing content. If the content is amazing, I push through, even if it's, it's not 100% comprehensible. That specific video I was watching didn't have subtitles, but I understood 70 or 80% of it. Now for the interesting part, comprehensible. As I was saying before, back in the days when also Stephen Krashen was talking about the interesting comprehensible input theory, but in general, we heard a lot about graded readers when it comes to reading. Nowadays, you have tools, and I'm going to just cite a couple of tools that have completely changed it all for those who are willing to use them. We have tools that allows us to make the incomprehensible comprehensible with one click, and most of the time for free. Think about something that is called ImTranslator or IM Translator. It's a simple Google, it's a simple Google extension you can install on your computer with one click. I have a video, by the way. If you write IM Translator Luca Lampariello, you will see the demonstration, also Chinese and other languages. You can create a content that, bilingual transcript out of a monolingual transcript. So picture this, you go on YouTube and you find a video that has subtitles, right? Now with Language Translator, which is the other Google extension, you can create a double strip subtitles. With any Wikipedia article or anything on the internet, you can create a bilingual text. And this, if you go, and I also have a video on Language Reactor, if you take a look at it, you can create bilingual scripts. When you have a bilingual script, you have a possibility of understanding. The incomprehensible becomes the comprehensible. And this is a very important thing, especially nowadays, because language learning, the rules and the mechanics and dynamics of language learning haven't changed. The human being has been like this for, I don't know how many years, thousands of years. But what has changed is the tools that we can use in order to learn, especially at this stage. Because at the beginner stage, a course book, okay, they give you, to dialogue in your target language, a dialogue in your native language. But when you now have the possibility of transforming any piece of content from something incomprehensible to comprehensible, that's a game changer. For example, I'm learning Serbian, and I had, unfortunately for Serbian, a lot of videos do not have subtitles, but you can actually now, you have tools to create transcriptions, to create bilingual transcriptions, and that allows us to stick to the fundamental rule of language learning at this stage for me, which is get exposed to comprehensible, rich, and compelling content, and boom, then the rest is history.
Luca, I can't wait to send you some of the jokes that we get in Serbian and the memes. You're going to really enjoy them. They're really funny. There are a couple of questions to do with sort of learning, and obviously the input thing is what we're talking about mostly now. How about things like to do with grammar, conjugations, like in Italian or Spanish or French, where the conjugations are many and crazy, and if you read, you have to read an awful lot or watch a lot of stuff to see all the different conjugations. How do you go about doing that? Is that also done in the natural way, like you're talking about, or do you go to grammar books or other ways to practice patterns of languages?
We're opening a can of worms. I could talk about this for hours. I'll try to limit myself to. I would say I'm neither someone who says, okay, just to get massive exposure, and then the more you see these verbs, the more you're going to learn. And I'm not either for deliberate, massive grammar study, which I think can backfire. So I'm something in the middle. I would say I use the 80-20 rule, which is in fashion these days, meaning that I get massive exposure 80% of the time by doing what I was telling you before. And actually 10% of the time I can, if I don't do this often, but I do sometimes, especially at the beginning, I tend to use grammar notes very quickly on the internet, or even tests on the internet, in order to reinforce some grammar patterns that are difficult to absorb. So I believe that massive exposure is key, but it's not enough. This is especially true when the language is very different. So when the language is distant, I call it, I think in terms of distance, when the language is very distant from your own native language, target language, native language, then you might have some deliberate grammar study. I'm not a grammar buff. I like learning grammar, but I do it maybe for the first 3-4 months when I use course books like Asimil. I resort to notes, grammar notes that are really great because they're short. I just read them. But I would not recommend wasting time on spending time on tables, grammar tables. I think this, especially at the beginning, backfires. I prefer just getting massive exposure with some grammar notes that explain the obscure points. When it comes to the intermediate stage, massive exposure, 5% or 10% of your time, maybe 5 minutes. If your learning session is 1 hour, you can dedicate it to reading some grammar notes without memorizing anything. Remember, grammar notes are there for you to, are there to help you clarify how does this pattern work. But when you have internalized a grammar pattern, you don't think about it in a deliberate way. It's just there. Sometimes people complain about the fact that they try to talk and all of a sudden grammar patterns that they've learned, actually they've learned the rule, gets in the way. So because of course you're thinking about the rule, but you're not using it. These are processed by different parts of the brain. One is a declarative memory, another one is procedural memory. For those who are interested, just look it up, procedural and declarative memory. They process language learning in the, one part processes words and grammar, deliberate instructions and grammar rules. The other part is how you actually develop a skill. And so the bottom line is 80% or even 90% of the time exposure, 10% if you want to get a grammar book. You can do it 5 minutes a day. I think it's more than enough if you want.
There's a question from Sadar asking about the deliberate practice and listening, and if you've got any examples of activities that you would use for deliberate practice that you could share.
So yeah, let's talk about the radio or a podcast. These are two different things. Let's talk about comprehensible resources and incomprehensible resources. Listening to the radio is not a comprehensible resource per se, because you don't have a transcript. You can create a transcript. It depends on your level, but if your level is not B2 yet, I would not use radio to learn. If you want to have it in the background, that's fine. But if you want to engage in deliberate practice, it's really important to have a transcription. And in order to have a transcription, you can have, you can use transcription programs. I'm using right now one I've discovered, one of my students has developed. It's called Saanaru, Saanaru. This is something that transforms any video or like any audio. It creates a transcript, and I use it because if you don't have a transcript, it's difficult to do deliberate practice or deliberate work on a piece of audio. So you first have to make the first step before anything, before the steps I'm going to lay out, is to give yourself the possibility of actually seeing the words that you're hearing. I'm talking if you have an A2 level or B1 level, and remember, you have to choose the resource that is, let's say, rich, so slightly difficult, but not too difficult. It contains obviously pieces of language that you do not know. And then you have to create a transcript. So let's suppose that, again, you have a YouTube video with subtitles, you have created your bilingual script with language reactor, or you have a YouTube video that doesn't have subtitles and you've used Saanaru to create your own transcript. That's the ideal situation where you can do deliberate practice. And deliberate practice is a series of steps that take you toward, from understanding little to understanding everything. For example, step number one could be, remember here, if you have the bilingual transcript in both languages, the first step could be, and this is actually what I do with podcasts, is you listen to your target language, let's say French, while reading the transcript in English. This allows you to immediately understand. It looks like it's difficult to do, but you get used to it pretty quickly, and it's actually cool. And this allows you to understand immediately the content because you're reading in your own native language. So you're listening to it in French. I suppose your native language here, for the sake of simplicity, is English, and you read it in English. The second passage is to listen to it and read it at the same time in your target language. That's another step and while you do that, you can mark words on the border of the page, and you can write the meaning of the words on the border of the page in your own native language. Then you listen to it again without any transcript. This gives you an idea. There's many combinations. I do it normally 5 steps and just laying out 3, but there's many combinations that you can do. And if you do that with a bilingual transcript and the piece of content in the audio in your target language, you can run this podcast, let's say a 10-minute podcast, 3-4 times, and in 40 minutes, you have completely dissected it very quickly. And you might say, okay, well, what about Chinese? You can do the same. Chinese, you have some tools that help you create the text bilingual with pinyin, the transliteration, doesn't matter the language. And then with these transcription tools or translation tools, you're able to speed up enormously the speed at which you understand a piece of content. And mind you, this is only phase 1. Phase 1 is understanding, it's not memorizing. Don't expect to memorize anything from this stage. This stage is just getting familiar with a piece of content, and make sure that you have the tools to speed up the learning process. Because if you have a piece of content that you do not understand, you're not going to listen to it, like the radio, and you don't understand half of it or less, you're not going to continue. If you understand, and you understand it fast, it gets exciting. So once that happens, if you start taking podcasts, a 3-minute podcast, 5, 10, you dissect them very quickly with all the tools. It takes you, 2 minutes, and you want to print them. I have, hundreds, and now they're there. I can even show you an example, but I have to walk away from this. And I don't know, Richard, if I can show them, maybe, show them.
Filipino, you go for it. If you want to show, you show.
Of course. Wait, let me just show you here if I can see it. Now I have. So, just to give you an idea, this is the amount of. Okay, just killing trees. It's true, but this is like for Greek. So here, this is a podcast from Easy Greek Podcast, and what I do is I just, this is simply a podcast. The script is just in Greek, as you can see here, and you can see that I just mark some words and expressions. Let me see if this is, I don't know, can Richard confirm that people can see something, or at least a little bit?
They may or may not, it depends.
Okay.
Some will, some won't. Yeah.
Well, anyway, it's just that this is a monolingual transcript, but I first put the bilingual transcript into my iPad. With that, I can immediately understand. I listen to it in Greek while I read it in Italian on my iPad. Then the second thing that I do, the second step, is I listen to it in Greek while I read it in Greek. The fact that I've done step number one allows me to create a story in my mind. When you listen to something in your target language, you read it in your own native language and you immediately understand it, images form in your mind. And these images help you remember what happens. And when you understand the story, it helps you, it creates some sort of visual infrastructure that holds words together. And then when you reread it in Greek, you remember these words. It's just amazing what this does. So if you create a series of steps, you can dissect anything quickly. And you can do this with podcasts, you can do this with videos, you can do this with books now. So I found out this Google Lens thing that is super easy to use. With Google Lens, I scan every book. I've been struggling with this damn book forever, which is Oz or It's. This is in Hungarian. And I read it in Polish, no problem. I read it in Russian, no problem. Hungarian gave me some problems. And then when I found out Google Lens, I just scan a page, takes you 5 seconds. It reads it in my own native language. And I read it I read it directly in Hungarian while the voice talks in Italian. So I immediately understand. It just changed the way I learn things. So I'm having a lot of fun.
That sounds like a really interesting recommendation. Let's have a look at that and see how it works.
Oh, you're gonna see. It like from the moment I figured out how to, because Google Lens was built to help tourists understand things on the street. Again, remember the hammer. This is a tool that you can use to learn anything, to take any page of a book, or it even copies the text. So you can just copy the text, you moves it on your computer. You can do so many things with Google Lens. Just search for Google Lens on YouTube and you will see a tutorial on how to use it. It's super easy. It's just amazing.
Wow. Excellent recommendation. Thank you, Luca. There's a comment about the whole intermediate plateau. And the comment is from Brian. Would you say that it just becomes harder to recognize your progress rather than your progress is stalled?
It just becomes harder to recognize your progress rather than your progress is stalled. I would say that a lot of people focus on goals. That's fine. There's just a little bit obsessed about, am I making progress? Language learning is a skill that you develop, so it's not that easy to be able to gauge your progress step by step. I would say that instead of focusing on whether you're making progress or not, stick to this fundamental rule: get exposure to the language, to the rich, compelling content that I was talking before, and make sure that you alternate deliberate and simple practice and across all 4 areas of language learning, and you are going to improve. I know that this might not be the answer you're looking for, but whenever I find myself thinking, am I making progress? Actually, I was spending energy that I could have, spent just making it happen every day. If you make it happen every day, and again, you balance these 2 modes of learning, language learning is bound to happen because you're wired to learn foreign languages as an individual. To learn as many languages as you want, as long as you know how to learn them, So it doesn't matter. Yes, your progress tends to, flatten a little bit because it's how, skills, how human beings learn in general. But if you, again, follow these strategies, you gotta keep learning all your life because the brain is very plastic.
Chanel has a question for you about Danish and wants to know, I think, is how you're getting along with it and what your plans are with Danish.
You know, I see the group of languages that I learn as a group of friends, and when you know, you get 15, 16 very close friends, with some, you have to make the decision and say, well, just for this amount, especially now, I'm just gonna see these friends, gonna have these friends, and I might go back and see some other friends. And Danish is one of those friends that I fall in touch with for a little bit because I'm pursuing now 3 languages actively. My closest friends, so to speak, right now, Greek, Serbian, and Hungarian, and I had, you know, something's got to give, as they say. I might go back to Danish, but for now, I just put it on. I think the last time I just touched Danish was a year ago, and I will go back to it. But for now, you know, you have to make decisions, and that's, you know, that's the one friend I've fallen in touch with. Put it this way.
Priorities, Luca. That's the thing, isn't it? You only have so many hours in the day. One of the questions also we've got, and I'm gonna take it even though it's a little bit provocative, but here we go. Do you think this is from an anonymous attendee, so here we go, being very daring here. Luca, do you feel people overstate their abilities, fake polyglots, are potentially damaging to the language learning community? Do you think that there are people like that, and do you think that they are damaging to the community?
I don't think they're damaging. I think I've made a couple of videos about this. I think that it's the individual's responsibility to learn how to gauge people. Meaning, like, let's suppose that you stumble upon a couple of interesting individuals who overstate their abilities, saying that they're claiming that they speak 30 languages or 40. It's their choice to do that. It's your choice to believe that, but it's your responsibility and duty to get educated about this. And once you get enough, you do enough research, it's amazing how quickly you can actually learn to distinguish people who know how to speak languages and people who don't. You might retort, how do I know if I don't speak these languages? I think that at the end of the day, you know, if you do enough research, you're able to tell first. The second thing is that damaging in what way? And you might say, well, this guy maybe buy this course or is spamming people to buy his course. Yes, but if you buy a course, you have 30 days. Normally, that's how it works, for example. 30 days, money back guarantee. You don't like it. You realize you have the responsibility and the duty again. Take this course. If you don't like it, if you don't find it useful, then you just return it. So I honestly, you know, I've never really found these questions to be very useful because there's, especially in the last 2 years, a surge of people trying to expose polyglots or fake polyglots. People want to, you know, speak languages, a bunch of languages, like, you know, Moses, our beloved Moses, who unfortunately passed away 2 years ago, he was getting a lot of flack for wanting to speak so many languages. I found him inspiring every time I watched a video when he was just learning, you know, especially the ones where he was just writing on how many languages you wanted to learn. That was inspiring for me. You know, everybody has a different approach. And again, if you find that someone might be a fake polyglot, don't follow him. It's your responsibility to figure out whether that's good for you or not. Does it matter that he's impacting other learners? Yes, it does matter in the grand scheme of things, but ultimately you can't do much about it. And you can do a lot for your own sake and understand what, you know, who are the people you want to follow if you want to improve your language learning endeavors.
Indeed. I agree with you. I think that you know, different people react differently to different things as well. So what one person feels put off with by, what other people feel inspired with and by, will differ greatly. And they could be exactly the same thing. So you could have the same person who inspires and uninspires different people. And so there's room for everything, I think, in life and in society. And I think we need to understand that there's a diversity of thought, a diversity of every individual that really needs to have some sort of outlet in some way. So, you know, whether your diversity is that you are inspired by somebody who learns phrases in languages and speaks to them on the street and enjoys doing that, and you see a positive reaction from the people they speak to, then there's nothing inherently wrong with that. They've done something positive by learning, even if it's only a few phrases. You're already taking positive steps to learn something out of your immediate circle and out of your sphere of knowledge. And as soon as you go beyond that, any further you go is also positive. By the same token, if you want to take one language and do a PhD in 18th century French literature, you know, looking at the use of clothing and material in that type of literature and go very, very deep into it, you're very welcome to do that too. One does not negate the other or exclude the other or diminish the other.
I agree. I agree 100%, Richard. And also I wanted to add that if you think, whenever you feel the temptation of wasting time on this matter, just think about the time you could invest in making yourself, you know, helping yourself get a better person. Whenever, for example, I think that this is again, we're opening a can of worms here, but remember, when you find yourself writing yourself, right, writing nasty comments, for those who do, there are, I'm pretty sure most of you are super nice people, but when we find ourselves writing comments or asking questions about this, it's because we have some sort of maybe insecurity, or maybe we're investing this energy into things that are actually depriving us of energy. And whenever you feel like it happens to, it's human, it happens to all of us, that you watch something, maybe you get envious of some person, or you get angry at them. Think about it and try to turn them around. For example, something that happens to me is when I find myself, I see someone on the internet is super successful, millions of views, and whatever, it doesn't have to be within the field of language learning, and I feel this pang of envy. I think, what is it that I admire of this person? So you can turn everything around. You can see things in different ways. But I myself am relentlessly trying to find ways to look at you know, the silver lining of every single aspect of my life. Sometimes I fail, and I'm only human, but I think that being an optimist and investing energy in things that actually turn the wheel, so to speak, or move the needle, it has had a huge impact on my life. When someone asks me, how do you have time to learn 15 languages, that I don't waste time. I try to use every single ounce of time that I have to move the needle or to do something productive, not just language learning, but in general, reading or doing other things, because unfortunately, our time is limited. You have to learn to use it well. And I don't think that asking yourself whether fake polyglots contribute or damage the community is one of those things you should invest your time on and energy.
Yeah. Very nicely said, Lucino. So, I mean, you are inspiring people in the chat. Olga wrote a very nice long comment about how much he admires you and would love to be in touch with you as well. And the anonymous attendee has written that, you know, thank you and for inspiring them. And also asks what amount of time you spend per day on languages. I mean, is this, obviously it's an obsession, the word obsession's used, which I think is fair for us, I think, Luca. But this poor person says that they're finding that they're burning out and don't want to slow down. But what kind of time is healthy? I mean, what you do, what other people do, where are you with your thoughts on this type of thing?
Okay, first to Olga, because I saw the comment. Olga, I think, yeah, you wrote me a message. I don't remember, it was months ago. The problem is that I'm a little bit brain scattered sometimes with WhatsApp. So I tend to receive messages and I tend to forget them. You can just write again. If I haven't replied, it's not because I was ignoring you, it's just because I received many messages. And lately it's been a little bit overwhelming. So I try to protect myself from, as much as I'd love to talk to everyone, sometimes it's difficult to answer, but nothing personal. It's just that I simply forgot, but I remember you. I think you also have a YouTube channel, if I'm not wrong, and I've watched a couple of videos, very interesting stuff. Now to answer Richard's question, well, this takes a long time, and I'm trying to reply as quickly as I can. I have integrated languages into my life. So there's two I distinguish two systems. I call them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the languages I know well. Let's say that I speak at a level which allows me to enjoy the language, using the language without having to do deliberate learning. So watching movies, talking to friends, etc. B2, C1, C2, and I have around 8 languages in that realm, let's say in that stage. And then I have languages that I'm actively learning where I haven't reached that level yet. Maybe I have B1, A2, B1, or less than B2. Those are the languages of System 2 that I pursue every single day. So on a daily basis, let's say that I can give you a precise answer when it comes to the time that I dedicate to System 2 languages. So let's say 30 to 45 minutes dedicated to Hungarian, 30 to 45 minutes dedicated to Greek, and 30 minutes every day dedicated to Serbian on a good day. Sometimes I can do only 2 languages, sometimes 3, but it ranges between 1 hour and 3 hours on a good day, especially on Saturdays and Sundays when I can do all 3 languages and I'm excited. I can do 1 hour, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 45. So it's 2-3 hours. This has been recently, the last year. Last year I was doing just Hungarian and Greek. But to answer the other part of the question, how many hours do I spend in language learning in general, is that I don't count the hours that I spend when it comes to System 1 because I just use them. So I have created a system in my own apartment where every space is a different language and a different activity. So I associate an activity, a time, and a space with a language. Let me give you an example. When I cook at lunch, so between 1 and 1:30, I listen to the news either in French or in Russian. At night, I listen to the news in TVN 24, which is Polish. So I already do these at least for, remember, eating means cooking, eating, and washing the dishes, which is already 20 to 30 minutes. So that, by doing that, I consume this amount of time in these languages. When I read at night, I have 3 reading sessions: one first in the morning, one after lunch, one in the evening, and I read different books in different languages. In the morning, for example, productivity or business or marketing, that's normally in English. In the afternoon, philosophy, normally in Italian or French, and then at night I read either in English or in Polish about astronomy, astronomy in Polish, or history in Russian or English. And I read the magazine in the bathroom in German. So I know that will make you laugh, Richard. Then when I take a shower, if I don't have to wash my hair, I use my AirPods and listen to podcasts. I thought about it and said, should I say this? Yes, because when I do it, I know Richard will just. I mean,
yeah.
just
and on his toilet roll, he has words written and the
oh my gosh. Okay, so just wrap it up.
oh.
This is without considering the fact that when I go out with friends, I have a lot of friends here, and organize things, and we talk in multiple languages. I used to live with a French guy, so there's, let's say, 5, 6, even 7 languages that I speak at a high level that I kind of use every day. At work, I use English, Italian, and Spanish all the time. So for working reasons, for my own, because of my own choices, or life choices, or bathroom choices, I use a number of languages every single day for System 1, and then on top of that, I have System 2. So I have a logbook. I haven't made this public. I have made some of my logbooks public, specific ones on the blog, but not this one. This is because it's very personal. But basically, I've been keeping for 2 years. It's called Maintenance Logbook, and I write System 1 and System 2. And every day, how many languages I learn and the activities and for how long. And the average is around 6 to 7 languages on a bad day, 10 languages on a good day. But it's never been more than 10 languages, depending on a like these lucky days where you have, for work, you have to use 3, 4. Then in your own life, you have to use 3, 4. And then you go out with friends and use 3, 4. And it adds up to 10. But normally, what has really facilitated me is integrating languages into my life and doing everything through these languages without even having to think about, am I learning this? No, I'm just using it. So that made a huge difference in my language learning maintenance and, language development in general.
I love it. We've got more questions. Unfortunately, we can't get to all of the questions this time around. But Luca, I'm sure you'll come back and join us. Now we've had an intimate look into your life.
I saw some of our questions about toilet paper, and my favorite language for showering is Polish. I use Spreaker.com, which is an amazing platform for podcasts, and I just listen to podcasts in the shower. Then in the bathroom,
And just to sort of to allay any fears, we will get the links and the names of the things that Luca's recommended here and put them in the description of the video when it goes into the Saturn Theatre. So look out for it when it's released, and you'll get the links there. I'll ask Luca for them afterwards to make sure I've captured them all. And Luca, all that remains for you to say is thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, for answering all the questions, for sharing probably a little bit too much, but also you've inspired us all, and I feel ready to go to the bathroom.
Oh boy, Richard, you're the man. Thanks for giving me the opportunity of sharing my love for my passion for language learning, and thank you for all the interesting questions and for being awesome as usual. And as always, happy language learning. Keep rocking live, and if your future is bright. Happy Sunday.
Take care, Lucino. Ciao, ciao. Oh.